One of the reasons it might be difficult to protect our boundaries, apart from it being uncomfortable, is that we are not always aware of where the limits are and how we're going to protect them if they are being challenged, voluntarily or unconsciously. If we are aversive towards conflict, we tend to compromise with our principles for the sake of peace. If it is a conscious choice, we can actually do this without feeling walked over. If not, we feel bad afterwards for not standing up for something that means a lot to us. Let's look at it in today's episode. While most of the world's population are not loud, rude, self centered, and entitled, the probability of walking through life without stumbling upon someone that fits the description is pretty small. These types of people pride themselves in taking an undeserved amount of space, belittling others, and only seeing the errors of others, while unable to see their own faults. They have often mastered the art of being victims, claiming honesty to allow themselves to insult others and to test boundaries. To guard yourself from the negative influence that such people spread wherever they go, you need to have some protective mechanisms in place. For any security measure to work, you need to know what is to be protected and against what. The risk analysis can be done in different categories according to the nature of the valuable you want to safeguard, such as physical, mental, financial, or principal standards. Though many risks might overlap categories, the specific risks identified mostly often fit into a specific group. By understanding what areas are of importance to you under the current circumstances, you can start mapping the risks. Whenever we are put on the spot without any preparation, our performance is expected to be subpar compared to having the opportunity to do some preparations. Any attribute or skill that you feel any amount of insecurity about is worth spending some time figuring out. It does not matter if the result is that you overcome the insecurity by accepting limitations and working with your strength, or improving yourself to a point where the risk is mitigated enough to be acceptable, by addressing the probability or the consequence. By looking at your areas of improvement with an honest and sober eye, you are better equipped when your boundaries related to these are being challenged. We have a tendency to have somewhat negative feelings towards things that we are insecure about. Be it shame or guilt, it might lead us to poor performance, even if our proficiency is great from the start. Similar to the experience of doing anything when supervised, compared to doing the same task in solitude in a state of flow. Two totally different results from the same person performing the same task. Knowing this will help be prepared to perform no matter what physical symptoms your body show when the imposter syndrome or guilt or shame strikes. An article from 2024 published in Personality and Environmental Issues attempts to generalize and systematize knowledge about how personal boundaries influence psychological well-being. The difficulty with establishing and maintaining our boundaries in the conditions of modern society are significant due to high speed transformative changes in all spheres of life, threatening individual identity and well being. The study emphasizes the importance of understanding the mechanisms of formation, functioning, and protection of personal boundaries. Healthy boundaries help people remain true to themselves, feel harmony, define needs and desires, and protect the psychological and emotional integrity. Defining personal boundaries or limits to the internal boundaries that an individual establishes for themselves in their interactions with the surrounding world and other people. These boundaries determine what type of behavior, communication, or influence we accept from others. The concept reflects the level of self awareness, self esteem, and interaction of the individual with the surrounding world, or as a way to maintain harmony and establishing contacts with our surrounding by balancing the preservation of authenticity and need for adaptation to society. A healthy person can achieve this by openly interacting with their surrounding world while maintaining their inner independence and individuality, allowing the person to freely express their individuality and develop deep and mutually beneficial relationships with others. It can also be understood as protection of thoughts, feelings, and behavior by not taking responsibility for the actions and feelings of other individuals or succumb to manipulation. The boundaries help us recognize needs and push us to learn to communicate them for maintenance and protection by knowing when and how to refuse or agree. Contemporary researchers often distinguish three types of personal boundaries: physical, indicating how close bodily an individual can interact with others; emotional, allowing differentiation of feelings, emotions, and attitudes of the individual towards others; and mental, what a person thinks and decides, thoughts and beliefs. Some added types might be spiritual boundaries that aids in the constant growth of spiritual resilience and self-love, identity and existential meaning. Sexual boundaries that include issues of consent, comfort, intimacy, safety, and personal limits that individuals establish for themselves in sexual situations. Material boundaries encompass questions of privacy, ownership, expenses, and limits regarding willingness to share material resources with others, which may be established to maintain comfort, safety, and personal well being. Time related boundaries determine how people spend their time, whom and what activities they prioritize, and also define the boundaries of accessibility for others in relation to their time. May include questions about personal time for self development, leisure, work, interaction with friends and family, as well as addressing personal needs and priorities. Another important difference is external boundaries, determining how people interact with others and what boundaries they set in their external environment, in contrast to internal boundaries, reflecting internal beliefs, values, experiences, and attitudes towards oneself, determining how individuals react to their own emotions, thoughts, and internal conflicts. Another study from 2025, published in Asian Journal of Research in Education and Social Sciences, also explores the role of boundaries in mental health, drawing from key psychological theories. Referring to the previously mentioned article, it agrees on many points, acknowledging limited academic journal articles on the topic as many focus on work-life balance. Though several well-established psychologists and scholars have written academic and semi-academic books that explores the intersection of personal boundaries using theory, research, and clinical practice. Using attachment theory, self-determination theory, and cognitive behavioral theory, the authors examine the relationship between boundaries and well-being. According to attachment theory, secure attachments foster emotional safety and autonomy. Inconsistent or overly rigid boundaries, on the other hand, fosters anxious or avoidant attachment styles, increasing relational distress and emotional insecurity. Using self-determination theory, we can see that boundaries serve as a way we can protect our autonomy and maintain a healthy balance between personal needs and external demands, leading to well-defined boundaries, intrinsic motivation, psychological resilience, and life satisfaction. On the opposite side, blurred or absent boundaries are linked to emotional exhaustion, burnout, and diminished well-being. In cognitive behavioral theory, boundaries impact self worth and interpersonal expectations. If unable to say no, the result will be chronic boundary violations, leading to increased stress and reduced well being. The study looks at boundaries in different emotional contexts, such as in a family setting, at work, in romantic relationships, with friends. It links healthy boundaries with aspects of well being such as stress reduction, emotional regulation, enhanced self esteem, and improved interpersonal relationships. A study done in 2024 and published in the psychology research think tank in the University of Alabama examines the effects of boundaries and whether they lead to increased life satisfaction and success in the studied area. Defining intrapersonal boundaries as restrictions I place on myself to enhance the achievement of a goal. Notice that they are related to yourself and not others' responses to your limits. Another study published in 2024 and updated in 2026 on the site positivity.org, a site focused on evidence based optimism, argues that boundary setting is a skill that can be learned and strengthened. Targeted interventions have showed to produce clinically significant improvements in measures of well being, symptom reduction, and life satisfaction. Evidence suggests that proactive practice of these skills prevent the development of more serious psychological difficulties, reducing the need for clinical intervention. In 2023, an article was published in Brains magazine exploring the neuroscience behind boundaries. As we are social creatures and wired to seek social connections and approval, we are many times inclined to avoid potential social conflict as we prioritize group cohesion and personal relationships. When bypassing our amygdala and the perceived social threat of setting boundaries by activating the logical prefrontal cortex, we give us a better shot at understanding how to succeed with setting boundaries. Another thing that might help us intercept a future conflict is having proactive boundaries instead of relying on reactive ones. This is achieved by enhancing our social predictive capabilities. Another way to see this is to understand boundaries as short term or long term benefits in relationship to individual or group benefits. Striking a balance between these will result in well being. An article series in Psychology Today argues that people who don't set boundaries with the people in their lives may believe that they are less worthy than others and that their needs are less deserving of attention out of fear for social consequences. The people pleaser type of personality is characterized by low self worth, low assertiveness, and low self awareness, also with a tendency to over apologize, take the blame when not at fault, and overvalue the praise of others. Some primary concepts used in the context of personal boundaries are passivity or porous, a state in which a person is unable to express their thoughts, feelings, and needs and typically follow the will of others. Aggressiveness or rigid, a state in which a person expresses their thoughts and needs in a tactlessness, dominating, and sometimes violating way in relation to other people's boundaries. Assertiveness, being healthy, a state in which a person expresses their thoughts, feelings, and needs openly, honestly, and without aggression. They are able to establish personal boundaries without violating the boundaries of others. It is a complex and multifaceted personality trait, developed by honing various skills and abilities, such as self confidence, attentiveness to the needs of others, empathy, taking responsibility for events in one's life, as well as understanding our strengths and weaknesses. Reflecting the principle of Gestalt therapy, I exist not to meet your expectations. You exist not to meet mine. A reason for finding it difficult to enforce our own boundaries, failing to respect them time and time again, might be understood in the classification of whole and torn personal boundaries. Whole ones being stable and clear, easily defined limits that help navigate the world with a sense of integrity. They help you open up to new experiences and relationships with maintained independence. Torn boundaries are blurred and unclear, making it difficult to define limits or establishing healthy relationships with others. They seem scattered, uncertain, and unprotected in their relationships and interactions with others. Understanding this might help develop self awareness and improve relationships to ourselves and others. Other factors named are different type of violations that lead to traumatic neurosis, inadequate awareness, fear of refusal, implicit expectations from others, stress, and cultural peculiarities. Another categorization is based on permeability, such as soft, spongy, rigid, flexible. People with soft boundaries tend to allow others to penetrate their space and life without significant resistance or protection. They may sacrifice their own needs and desires for the sake of others and become victims of psychological manipulation. To establish and enforce boundaries, these three processes are to be followed. Step one is to identify the desired boundary. Secondly, the needs must be communicated. And lastly, it needs to be followed up with action. Demonstrate the commitment through your behavior. Set clear intentions. Use evidence based approaches. Integrate them into daily life. Monitor your progress. And don't forget to celebrate milestones. To efficiently establish boundaries, it is vital to enhance our emotional regulation capabilities and ensure a balanced interaction between emotional and rational brain regions. Use cognitive rehearsals, Visualize and articulate your boundaries in a safe space. Refine them without the fear of real world consequence. Understanding how the request can be met might help you prepare mentally and ready to respond accordingly. Negative ways you can be met when expressing a desired boundary might be through pushback, limit testing, ignoring, rationalizing and questioning, defensiveness, ghosting, silent treatment, or best case, through acceptance and respect for your need. Individuals who had more, stronger boundaries had higher life satisfaction. In the context of spirituality, academic and professional, and romantic relationships had the strongest impact. Individuals who had many strong boundaries in each context, rather than just one or two, reported being happier and more content with life. It is more important to set strong boundaries rather than have many weak or permeable boundaries. Understanding the psychology behind how you perceive the act of identifying and setting boundaries empowers you to make informed choices about your well being. Some anecdotes. Through my life, I have struggled with my self image and whom I wish to be in contrast to who I actually am at a specific moment. Often, when I felt guilt and shame, was when I failed to live up to my own standards and principles. Often, I constructed a narrative afterwards that helped me cope with my shortcomings by justifying the way I acted. Even though it might have helped me sleep at night, I knew deep down that I failed myself twice. Nowadays, I am merciless when evaluating my actions. We all have our own journeys and struggles that dictate the intensity of the different obstacles that we face. The sooner we understand our current mission, depending on the phase we are in our lives, the sooner we can tailor our quest to surpass our limits, either real or self imposed ones. Remember to choose your battles. There is no point fighting everything as it only leads to defeat and perpetuates our feeling of failure and leave us exhausted. Focus on the aspects that creates pain in your life or limits you from living the life you aspire to. Decide and create your own destiny. Some limitations. Rarely does existence take in consideration intersecting negative features, striking any single individual all at once. Thus, you could be born under unfortunate conditions, suffer hardships through your whole life, and are miserable no matter how good of a person you have been. At the same time, there is no karmic justice punishing evil people by default. Apart from the random amount of luck involved, what really keep the scale balanced or not are our individual and collective actions. In life, we have choices. As society has deemed these choices as good or evil, voluntary or forced, they do not always follow what is deemed as lawful or not at the moment. Some morally despicable acts might not be prohibited by law, and other good deeds might get punished by society. How well adjusted to this truth we are affects our ability to make tough calls when forced, without labeling choices made as needs or being forced when they actually are our wants. All this to say that there are actual nuances to this, as there is no single universal human experience. People growing up in a safe and nurturing environment have a totally different experience compared to someone brought up in misery and trauma. You only have to look at our psychological needs or look at any nation that has advanced past survival. When needs are met, you can extend your help to others. Analyze which insecurities that are prioritized high enough for you to work on. The base for this is the amount of pain they put you through if push comes to shove. Think about where the fear comes from. Use this to find your area of improvement. Make a plan for what goal to aim for and how you are supposed to reach it. Exposing for scary situations might be difficult to plan for, but identifying one when it is happening can be used for practice and evaluation. Be honest in admitting that certain situations are too uncomfortable or scary for you to ever think that you someday could learn to sit through the feelings and handle the situation with grace. That is why it needs to be divided to smaller parts so that each step is reachable from the perspective of your current skill level and experience of control until you feel confident in your proficiency. Remember that goals might need to be broken down in particular steps. If you feel scared at standing up to someone stronger than you, it can be broken down to improved self defense ability, strong physique, courage, and mental fortitude to stand up for your right to live free from harassment. When being aware of your biggest fear, it is easy to make the choice to stay passive in the wake of the threat, leaving your fate to the whim of others. This is common due to the complexity of situations that are not natural for normal people who usually solve disagreements with communication. As with democracy, sometimes freedom and peace needs to be enforced upon others who threatens what we value. When the well-deserved peace creates calmness, we can go back to being our best selves. Don't forget that imposing your will on others needs to come from a place of compassion and education. The same thing as when we tell our partner of our boundaries to give the person the opportunity to respect them so we can grow together. If not informed, it is easy to overstep, as you have no reference point to aim at. If they still choose to step over our boundaries, it is up to us to enforce them by showing that it is not tolerated. If continued, the actions taken need to increase in intensity. If you want to support us, you can try out our Almir app. You will find it on either app store. If you want to support us in other ways, you could join our community forum, or you could like and comment on this episode. That will help us out a bunch. Take care of yourselves and your peers. See you in the next episode.